Okay, so hello everyone. Hope you can hear me. Okay, so hi, my name is Wafa Wahida, and I'm a software engineer based in Qatar. So thanks a lot for joining me today. And today we're going to talk about architecture patterns for building scalable Angular web apps. So yeah, I mean, if you're joining me now, I'm going to start with an assumption that you likely have some experience with Angular, and you're joining this talk to basically improve your application with good practices, good and maybe like design patterns. Um, Simply because you're like experiencing a challenge while building your Angular app. You're facing a challenge of scalability. So you have a front end which is built in Angular, and now like suddenly you have like a lot of features, a lot of data, like a lot of things added to it, and you are basically stuck. You don't know what to do. And if you are one among them, then this talk is going to be quite helpful for you. Also, like anyone who's joining, and to just get a flavor of what kind of architecture patterns you can use for building your Angular apps. I think this is what we'll cover. So in the next few minutes, we'll be taking a deep dive, like, or maybe a slight kind of swim into object oriented programming. And also we'll be talking mostly about code structure because it's architecture patterns, right, that we're here to discuss. So we'll discuss like how architecture patterns can help you solve the problem of scalability that you're facing with your code base, with your front end code base, while you're building this Angular app. So it's kind of like a code structure which will give like a blueprint for your Angular app, and by following these like different techniques that we'll see, you can say that, okay, for solving like a particular problem of the design of my code, I can maybe use this design pattern. So I mean, we're trying to get at that. While doing so, we'll also be looking at like the different design patterns that already Angular is built upon. So Angular is a framework, like and framework is something which comes with a lot of things inbuilt, right? And especially for designing scalable web apps, Angular is your go-to framework. Without further ado, let's just start. Like, let's start by first discussing what are the different Angular, design patterns that Angular is using. So here, like, we want to now discuss like the different design patterns that Angular is built upon, and by incorporating these patterns, how like you can first, like, try to identify these patterns and try to leverage on it, like try to speed up your development process, try to write code which is more flexible, reusable. Because hey, I just started by saying that you are all like now having this challenge. You're facing a challenge of you don't know how to scale your app, basically. So yeah, hopefully by understanding the design patterns that Angular is built upon, you'll get an insight into how things can be smooth, and how things can so I just see a comment. Yeah, certainly these patterns are applicable. Design is universal, right? Like, thanks for the question. Design is very universal, and of course, you can apply it anywhere. Like, if you're using XY design pattern for Angular, maybe you can do the same for React. So design, like I said, it's very universal. You get the idea and try to apply that idea into your project, like incorporate that into your project. So it can start with basic things like code structure, folder structure of your app. We might think that, okay, yeah, it's very simple, and we often don't try to put a lot of thought while doing it, but it's kind of very important that we do. So yeah, let's start with a quick recap of what Angular is, and here we're going to cover quite a lot of things, like what's TypeScript, how's TypeScript related to Angular, and RxJS, what's RxJS, and also we'll see what are the building blocks of Angular. So to just break it down and take it step by step, let's start discussing TypeScript. I mean, we all know JavaScript. What's TypeScript? TypeScript, if you're familiar with Angular already, you know that Angular is built with TypeScript. And you can see how, like, we as JavaScript developers always like are in a chaotic mood, or kind of like, are stressed about something not working. And especially, when you have a production and you're like kind of facing a bug, it gets really challenging, right? Because I mean, just because of the nature of JavaScript, it kind of makes things unpredictable. So now with TypeScript, TypeScript is by Microsoft, by the way. So TypeScript is something which gives structure to your JavaScript. It gives it provides optional static typing. So now you have JavaScript and you just say var, like, you don't even define if it's an int or an int or a string, or like your entire variables, everything, like all the data that you deal with in your code, it's dynamic. Your JavaScript engine, the browser engine, picks it on by itself. Whereas with TypeScript, you're kind of giving the option of static typing. You're going to say, like, okay, this is the type you're going to have. And not just that, TypeScript comes with a lot of object oriented concepts like classes, interface, and it can bring like it can help you write robust software, and you can also easily with deploy TypeScript, like incorporate TypeScript in your regular JavaScript apps. Okay, no questions. By the way, just feel free to ask questions on the chat. I didn't say that earlier. Anyways, now let's talk a little bit about RxJS. RxJS is reactive JS, reactive JavaScript. So that's one of the patterns that Angular is like kind of using. These two are baked into Angular. So that's what, like, I feel for beginners, it gets a little challenging while they're trying to learn Angular, because TypeScript and RxJS is kind of baked into Angular. It gets really challenging for them. So reactive JavaScript, it's a programming paradigm. It's more like when you were talking about data, like when you were dealing with data in your front end apps on a regular JavaScript app, you'd be expecting data from, say, like an API or some other service, right? And usually you expect a promise. A promise is something which is like you put it in your code. You're expecting like one. It's very fast. Its responsibility is to give you the data, and that's it. It's done. It gets resolved or rejected based on the type of response you get, right? Whereas with RxJS, Angular is again, like, introducing another concept of observables. So just like promises, observables are responsible for making HTTP requests, getting data. And with observables, what you get is they're not like immediately you call them in the code and that's it. No, they're not fast and they don't end right away. It's like a pipe. It's observables are usually used for like a stream of data, and it's like a pipe and you can listen to it. So it doesn't end there. So you can subscribe to it. You can play, okay, this is the data I got like before 2-3 calls, or it's you can literally imagine it to be a pipe. So programming with these observables, it gets really easier with a reactive approach. And that's how we have RxJS kind of baked into Angular. Because Angular does not have promises. You can convert an observable into promise, but why would you do that? Anyways, so Angular is using observables, and it gets really easier to maintain observables with RxJS. So yeah, that's kind of the package about just TypeScript and Angular and how like these things are baked into it. And yeah, I think if we just take a step back and now like think about, okay, what Angular's now done. You have this structure to your app, like you're structuring JavaScript through TypeScript, and you're also eliminating that surprise of a promise, right? Like you don't know when it'll react. You don't know, like it's very asynchronous. It's like a thread which is going on its own. You don't know when to expect a reply and what to do. So by adopting a reactive approach using RxJS and primarily observables, you have now like the capability of, like, you have that certainty. You kind of bring in that predictable um, nature in your app, and that makes like you have less surprises. So that's why like Angular is a framework, and it can help you build scalable apps. So now let's talk a little about like the building blocks of Angular. Just understanding like what are these what's Angular made of, so we can discuss the design patterns, especially one design pattern which is like nowadays, and I think it's been gaining a lot of popularity, especially for like the component design and front end architecture. We'll discuss that design pattern. Yeah, now let's talk a little about Angular. The building blocks of an Angular or any front end app is components. If you think of like all apps to be systems, and just like how systems are built with something like a lot of processes, you can, in the same terminology, if you shift to the front end world, like you have components to be those tiny representatives which make like the entire app function. So now these days it's no longer like, okay, this page, that page, this HTML, you no longer think in that way. You think in component approach. So components are like a single piece of a UI. It could be like maybe a chat window, it could be your header, it could be your top nav bar, it could be anything. A component is like ideally a piece of UI which contributes to your app. So Angular like has components uh, like baked in, and they have like they let you define components which represents like a portion of a behavior, like which allows like the users to interact with it, and kind of get you the behavior. So again, like this is all wrapped up in module. If you can see, like here you have a module and you have component, service, and external module. Let's talk about this is kind of like the whole overview of how Angular is built. So we have a component which is like ideally a class which you'll be importing to create. And you'll also have service is another building block, and these are all like built into, like it can be one module, they're all like separate modules. So let me define a module is just like a container that groups like a lot of functionality together. So it's Angular is very modular because component is kind of a module, is a type of a module. Directives, services, and all these like are types of modules. So with components, with services to get your data, components for behavior, you kind of structure your app, you build your app. So if you've already built apps, you must be knowing all this. Now like if we look at the component in detail, this is how the behavior of the component is. Like you can capture events, you can inject a service for data, basically. Like imagine this to be an API call, and you're sending some data, like a part of data, to your component, and you're binding this to the template is again another it's basically your HTML file and how you define the view of your component. So you can bind your properties, you can bind events, you can also add some metadata, and you can create your own directives. You can see like there's so much of object oriented going on here. You have like just looking at this, at a very high level, if you look at this architecture diagram, you can say that there are classes for sure. Of course, you can't build a framework without writing classes. They're also using modules, they're using different patterns which are baked into for you, which are allowing you to do all this, right? So I mean, if we want to like take a look at what these patterns are, uh, what are the design patterns of Angular? Like of course, sorry, I just skip a slide. Yeah. So we saw services, we saw components, we saw we also saw modules. Now like let's look at what Angular is like. What are the other things like in detail which we need to talk about that Angular has that makes it like it's important for us to understand, so we can make our apps more scalable and apply these design patterns. So I'm just kind of giving you like, you know, the dictionary, like just defining the terms, like the things that we'll need to probably refresh, and then we hit the design pattern, like okay, these are the approaches we can use, and you know, this is why it's scalable and so on. So now like talking about Angular, like do we have any questions so far? Okay, thank you. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about observables. I think we covered observables already. Let's talk about one-way data flow. So usually, if you've developed apps, there's like, you know, generally any web application, it takes this model view control kind of framework, right? Like it takes this pattern, it deploys this pattern, and you know, the data flow, by data flow I mean some variable ideally being passed from the model to the view to the controller. This is like, you know, there's like a flow and there's like a direction for the flow. So by one way data flow I mean that whatever is flowing between the model and the view is just like one direction, it's not gonna come back. So it's by the way, Angular was you can do two-way data binding, like two-way data flow in Angular, but in order to, like, you know, scale, for it to scale, this is what we advise. Like we specifically wanted to discuss one-way data flow because this kind of like sticking to one-way data flow makes your app scalable, more scalable, because it kind of uh, helps you avoid that predictability, like unpredictability of a two-way data flow, uh, and give everything, like hand over all the data part, the state part of your application to RxJS or like any libraries that we'll see. So we just mentioned state, right? Like, I mean, what do I mean by state? So if you think of like a, you know, a web page, like if you imagine maybe a registration form of a web page, maybe so you can think of state as being like, okay, you know, imagine you being the end user, you're filling up a form, and you filled up a form and you're about to click submit, like register, and you know, your app needs to, like, now as a developer, if you think about the code of this registration app, behind the scenes you have to take care of, okay, the user has filled so and so fields and he's about to click enter, or he's going to click enter, and you'll have like some method being called like when he clicks registered and all that, right? So it's kind of like capturing all this data. It's kind of like trying to get state is nothing but trying to get um, where your app is, where the user in your app is, where the data in your app is at which point of time. So that's state. And with Angular, like we want to have like something centralized, like, you know, you each component can have its own state, like its own representation of where the data is, of what user action the user has done. But we'll see like how centralized state management is more preferred. Like it's gonna be more preferable for Angular, because I mean for scalability, because it's gonna avoid all the unpredictability, and it's gonna make your app more reliable. So now, like, I think we've covered some ground. We know the basic building blocks of Angular. We know, like, okay, these are the things we recommend, like one-way data flow, centralized state management. Now let's look like a peek into the design patterns that would be like good to have. I mean that's good to know as well as good to because we already have it. Component design pattern is something that you can deploy because components are already there and you create components in your code, right? So we'll be discussing component design pattern in detail in our talk, and we're just gonna like go through the rest. So the other kind of pattern that I wanted to talk first is the mix and design pattern. So mixin is what like earlier days frameworks, before React and even the Angular 2 came out, mix and design pattern was mostly used by these frameworks. So what mix and design pattern is that it would like you can get access to another existing component with like some properties of the other component, and it allows you to like using this pattern. This is what the mixing pattern does. But the entire shift came in now. It's good to know mix and design pattern, because now we're no longer using it and we're going more towards composition. Composition as in like how you use multiple components to compose an app, rather than using something like mixin, where you're extending, like I mean you're just calling the existing component and trying to use those properties. It's like too many components ideally doing the same thing. But with composition, it's like, okay, each component can do its own thing and you can keep composing them like inside each other, or like it's more like if you're familiar to the React world, you can look up higher order components and how like composition is mostly like giving you the curve there. So mixins are basically dead, and I just want to like pointed that because it was a good design pattern, and from that evolved the other need for a composition and so on. So the other design pattern that Angular already deploys and uses is dependency injection. So we did see like in the architecture, Angular architecture that we saw uh, quite recently, what dependency injector is, right? Dependency injection is somewhat similar like that. We'll get in details now. It allows you to like basically inject Angular component through a data model and a service. This particular, like by just isolating the entire service, the data part from your component, you're making it like more testable and uh, basically just helping with the maintenance, code maintenance. So I think I have a slide explaining what dependency injector pattern is, but I just want to give you a flavor of this. And also like there can be more custom design patterns, like for the state of your app. So basically with your Angular app, there are like two kind of design patterns, two places where you can apply these design patterns. So there's component design and there's state design. So you can by the way, Angular is like model view whatever. So it allows you to, it doesn't enforce a design pattern. Since it's a framework, it comes with some designs like inbuilt, in order to like give you that stage of allowing you to create components, allowing you to have services. So I think we've covered some ground on that, like with the basic building block diagram. Now let's look at what dependency injector pattern is. Dependency injector pattern, which are used like especially in Angular for injecting services into your component, is this like makes your app more testable. Here, like what it ideally means is that you have one class which is a service, and maybe you have a method in the service, and you have another class which can be your component. So your component can use some methods of your service, and this becomes a dependency. And with like the injector and the kind of uh, the library and the framework provides, it allows you like it gives you room to inject this, like it gives you room to just inject a service in a component, create a component all through decorators. And we're going to see like how what decorators are as well. So yeah, now like let's talk a little more about component design pattern, because I think this is I essentially like the just like the very important part of the presentation. So of course, like I mean, now as a developer, you have this front end app and you have this component, like you have so many component files. You're just like now you got a request from your manager or like from your customer saying you want to add a little more features. I mean, like more features. You're basically extending your app, and you don't know what to do because maybe you started out by just creating folders at random, or things like that. But by having a design pattern in place, it's gonna help you make your code more cleaner, more maintainable, more reliable, and we also saw like how state management can also help. Now, like I mean, specifically about component design pattern, there are like two kinds of components. uh, Ideally, like smart and dumb components, stateful and stateless components, they're ideally the same thing. So smart component is something which has a service injected in it. To just put it, it has its own controllers. It kind of knows, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. Whereas dump component does not know anything. It's just HTML. It's maybe like only throwing template. It's just responsible for showing something on the UI. Stateful, stateless is almost the same. Like a stateful component and is a smart component. A stateless component is a dump component. And by this, what I mean is, like you can create components which are like container components. So they're more than a normal component. They're more than a dump component. They can have service. They can they can leverage on it. So I mean, like there are so many ways to do like component design, right? um, so just like going back to the problem we were facing the problem of like having this big complex app built with Angular. And it's gonna soon, like you already have these many component classes now. And there are like so many services injected into it already. You have like a lot of container components, like we just saw the type of components, right? Introducing the facade design pattern. This is one of the many design patterns, one of the many structural design patterns. So this pattern has been like mostly used especially for components. And from since the component driven um, design is in place through all these frameworks like React and Angular, facade is the kind of well used design pattern. So here you can say that like here we know the problem already. Now let's talk about how facade can solve it. And before that, what's facade? Facade is it helps you encapsulate a complex kind of feature into one object. Like you can think of like facade, maybe okay, imagine your app to be having multiple pages, like each page doing something, maybe like add user, and then checkout user. So add user, if that's like one page of your app, that can be a facade. It does a lot of things. It can have like numerous containers, numerous container components, normal components. So by just like grouping them by encapsulating them with like a complex some the common tasks that they do, you can leverage a lot, like on just by designing components this way. It promotes decoupling the subsystem, like the sub components. And it's more scalable because you can you just have like one kind of parent which is doing which is kind of like the point for you to check, okay, if something went wrong on one page, I have to look at that parent. And from that parent I can see like, okay, it's kind of like it helps you treat things that way. So yeah, I mean, to talk about like it's not like we're biased only to facade approach, right? Like there are so many other approaches. So I recommend this book by Gang of Four on design patterns. If you just Google Gang of Four design patterns, it's basically just four people who are really into architecture, proposing like that's why it's called Gang of Four. So they have a very nice book written on it, and written on different design patterns, object oriented design patterns. It's a very recommended read from my side. You can see how, like, the different design patterns that they talk about, they cluster them into three three main design patterns. We are more interested into the structural design pattern, and we saw that facade is one of them, right? Like one of the things we saw today. We also know that decorator, Angular is inbuiltly using decorator, and you can also create your own decorator using Angular. So these are like the different design patterns that you have. And when you move to the behavioral side, like behavioral design patterns, this is more about, like, how you can structure your data, like the data behavior of your app, like the state of your app, the centralized state management. What are the different kind of patterns you can apply from here? You can already see observer pattern and state pattern. Like there are so many other approaches. I would really recommend this book. It's a must read. I think I'm a little over time, but let's look if you have any questions. Okay, no questions. So yeah, I mean, with that being said, if it's too much like for you to take, if you're not like familiar with Angular, we are I'll be personally like offering a lot on the topic of Angular. And do check out this hashtag 14 days of Angular. It's something personal that I'd really like to build up. So my whole idea of this initiative is to have like separate tracks: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. It's just like a movement, like 100 days of code, getting inspired from 100 days of code. Here you can just come together, and we can you'll have some material to go through. Like if you're a novice in web development, how can you get started? You can join like a lot of beginners who are in the same page as you, or even a mix of things. It's just like an initiative to help us motivate each other, relearn Angular. So hopefully this is coming soon. And yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you. And we can take questions if you have any. And that's my Twitter handle in case you want to follow. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm sharing a